Welcome to another episode of the Spinoza Triad, where myself, John Gibbs, Dr. Richard Miller, and Dan Rowlands discuss things which interest us and apply our understanding of philosophy. In this episode, we look at the world of Batman and Gotham City and the Batman movies and the Batman franchise, and use our understanding of semiotics and structuralism to decode not only these movies and these images, but also make some connections with the world we live in. Hope you enjoy our discussion.
I think what we're talking about is the city. Cities and representations of city as a text, as a decode, as something to understand, in particular reference to Gotham, the famous Gotham City in the Batman series, Batman comics, and Gotham. I looked up the origin of the word, of why it's called Gotham. I don't know if you did this. This is like, hey, thank you, Wikipedia. As everybody knows, Gotham. Well, I thought it was obvious. I thought it was just a play on Gothic, which I think is the appeal of the word. I think Gotham City in Batman, what you hear is goth and Gothic, but it originates apparently from Washington Irving, the American writer and critic and journalist and so on. And apparently he and a group of literary friends were familiar with a story. I think it's called The Legend of the Wise Men of Gotham, which is an English folktale. And the Wise Men of Gotham was a little village in this country where, to avoid a visit from the King John, I think it was, to avoid a visit from King John, they all declared themselves to be imbeciles. So they were the idiots of Gotham. So basically, it's a joke on
the field of Gotham. Okay.
Yeah. So Washington Irving and his friends start referring to New York as Gotham, as a nickname for New York as Gotham, meaning the city of idiots or the city of fools. So it's a bit like that.
The town was originally somewhere in England, or was this sort of in the United States?
No, the little village. There was a little village. So it's an English folktale called The Wise Men of Gotham.
Oh, right.
Which being literary chaps, they knew. And so they then write articles about Gotham's. And now as we go back to Gotham, and anyway, it gets picked up, I think, because it sounds like Gothic.
Right.
And but its origin is this story.
Folklore.
It's a sort of joke among literary critics, but then it gets picked up by the Batman comics.
I did look at the origins of that with the architectural draftsman Hugh Ferris. In 1929, did some kind of book, which the original cartoons of Gotham just show this kind of deco, kind of like layering of buildings, which I guess would be a good place to start.
Yes.
I mean, we did mention semiotics, didn't we, as a way of sort of reading this kind of image, or the city as text.
Should we explain what semiotics means?
It's the study of signs, isn't it? It's how signs transfer meaning. So if you have an object and you have something that represents the object, it's a kind of system of signs which, so I mean, that's so like
what would be a sign then? I mean, you think of road signs or...
Yeah. So a road sign,
beyond that.
It's the sort of founding father of semiotics. There's two founding fathers of semiotics. There's Ferdinand de Saussure and C.S. Peirce in the United States. And they produce a science of reading language, it's a language science. And his great insight is that the sign, that's a word, a noise word, sound, or a written word, or a thing you see, is disconnected from it, what it signifies. So there's a sign, the thing, and the signifier. And the signifier is where the interest becomes. So the signifier and the sign are quite arbitrary. So a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So, it isn't that the sign is simply a code message and the signifier is the meaning. And then when you start looking at the world as a coded series of symbols, you can decode the world. And that opens up the floodgates to the science of reading the world, texts, clothing,
that's interesting.
Any human cultural activity. And of course, texts themselves, written texts, can be decoded as a system of signs, and the signs then have their meaning and their connotations and their and how those connotations reveal, that's the trick of it, the ideologies and the underlying value systems of society. So it's a sort of breakthrough into the world of reading the world.
It's used a lot in advertising, how something produces meaning to us. I mean, you mentioned a rose earlier, John. A rose would have, you have the object, the flower, but the rose obviously has inbuilt with various meanings, romance, or it could mean, rugby for if you're in the UK, or it could,
Labour Party, England, Britishness, romance, death, danger of love, the thorns. It's a mobile metaphor, and and in that sense, but it's once you start saying, well, that's true. So when I'm going to, you use the rose on a product to represent the Englishness of this thing, or you place it on the England's rugby team, or you put it on the Labour Party. Why did Labour adopt the rose? They adopt the rose because they want to fix themselves as being English. It's red, so that's left-wing communism, red flag, so on. But it's also Englishness because they're trying to fix themselves in the minds. We are not a threat to anybody.
But why is the rose associated with England?
Why is anything arbitrarily?
Where's it come from?
The key here is that we agree on it, Dan. So it's in the agreement that a sign has it achieves meaning. Basically, it's encoded in a certain way and it's decoded, and depending on how much it's in agreement. So, I mean, the obvious one is language. Language works as a signifier. The word pen only exists because we all agree that it means pen within the English language.
Yes.
And then the signifiers themselves work together in chains, signifying chains, where you have the relationship between them. So you almost have, much like we've talked about before, like an objective material world. And then you have this almost like a matrix of meaning, which is overlaid on top of it. And what these guys were interested in were really how you then deconstruct this matrix and look for hidden meanings. Very often these meanings are given to us and we understand them without there are hidden ideological dimensions to it as well.
So is it looking at the relationship between the signs and the signifier, and whether the signifier might impact the sign and vice versa? Is it the relation?
It's always the sign is disconnected from the signifier in a sense.
Yeah.
The signifier becomes less important than what it signifies. For instance, at the beginning of this, I said, nerdily, I've looked up the origins of Gotham. Well, that's not semiotics. That's not what semiotics interested in that. Who cares? Who cares that Washington Irving started this thing? What the important thing about the word Gotham is what it means to us now. How it is. It's what we are using it for. So it's actually, if I go out in the street today and say Gotham, people don't say, oh yes, Washington Irving. What they say is Batman, or they say urban design. And they won't necessarily say that in 100 years' time. So semiotics is the study of signs and how they are used and changed and mobile and altered and developed in society.
And achieve meaning, basically.
And achieve meaning.
Yeah.
Because as soon as although it says it's arbitrary, it's arbitrary in a way that reveals, as Rich was saying.
And it
reveals something hidden.
Is it how they achieve meaning? Is that what semiotics is trying to unravel? Or is it just understanding the meaning?
Yes, because if I understand, for instance, if I say the Labour Party wants to use the rose, and I attribute a mechanism to that, an intention like Labour doesn't want to be, the Zinoviev letter, the Marxists, somehow connected with dodgy people, or they don't want to be trades unions who are the enemy within, according to Mrs. Thatcher. They want to be they want to be the party of business and Englishness. So they choose a rose. Why did the Tory party choose an oak tree? Was it oak tree? They had a big oak tree for a while. Similar sorts of reasons.
English oak.
Yeah, the English oak. We're safe.
We're growing.
Yeah. We're safe.
Yeah.
And that.
Interesting.
So if we go back to Gotham here, because I'd far rather talk about Gotham than the Labour Party. Gotham how do we think? I mean, John, we were going to put, for anyone listening to this, we were going to put the image right on the front of the podcast, an image of Gotham. I'm assuming that everyone here has a rough idea of what we're talking about when we mention the city, because it's quite iconic in its representation. I mean, so the way semiotics, I think, would work, if we look at what's actually there, the denotation, they call it, what's the actual images there, I think, generally speaking, the images of Gotham are dark. You've got skyscrapers. You've got very often a kind of like mist, smoke, rain. It has these images, and periodically pierced by bright light, either coming from underneath or above in the form of like lights, helicopter lights coming down. Can we say anything about that, do you think?
That design of the comics, and then that's translated particularly into some film. I mean, and film buffs will say one Batman film, develops the Gotham imagery differently to others, but essentially those are the main features, aren't they?
Yeah.
You've got Art Deco, you've got Gothic architecture, you've got chiaroscuro, the black and white sharp edges.
Yeah.
The shadow, faces caught half in shadow, figures emerging from shadow, deep areas of shadow, and the misty streets. You say, well, where is all this? Why is this, and where is this coming from?
Things that are dark, that signify perhaps of secretive, cunning, like an underworld almost. It's not. If it was all white, shiny with bright lights and silver everywhere and gold, it would have a very different. The meaning would be very different to this dark layering. And you mentioned something in there as well, John. You said about art and a kind of split. And I think that when you look at the imagery of Gotham, there are parts of light, there are splits, and if you think about the characters within Gotham, is basically a stage of which good and evil, and it gets quite muddied when you look at the characters in there. But this idea of a split runs as a central theme, I think, within the story of Gotham. Batman is split, isn't he? You've got the Bruce Wayne character and the Batman. You've got, I was just watching the Gotham series the other night. We talked about doing this, and you've got the two policemen in it, that are almost split characters. You've got the good one and the ethical one and the less ethical one. You've got characters like, is it Two-Face or something it's called? He's got like half face or something. So this idea of like these split narratives run through it. And I think if we go in to look at the myth around this, I think there are myths around this idea of a split and a half.
You're talking Levi-Strauss and binaries.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And this is the sort of structuralist writer, Levi-Strauss. Semiotics is going to form part of structuralism. The whole idea that in society, sign systems represent underlying structures that are universal.
So it's universal.
Universal to all. So here we're heading into the things we've talked about before. Myths and stories and such like have binary opposites. Whether the man in the black hat, the man in the white hat, the good and the bad. Batman is his own binary, as Rich says. He's the rich, lazy Bruce Wayne, who everyone thinks is a bit. I suppose Superman's the same. And then there's the Batman, dark and methodically ruthless, who is everything the opposite. If Bruce Wayne is languid and urbane and yet idle, the rich guy who appears to be doing nothing with his life, who most people don't think of anything other than a playboy, and Batman is everything the opposite of that. He's direct, he's a man of few words and massive action. So it's a binary.
Mm.
And you can find binaries throughout, according to structuralists, according to semiotics. It's a fundamental alignment of opposites which give to stories the tension that moves them forward.
Did it move on away from structuralism, semiotics? Was structuralism challenged at all?
Yeah, I mean, well, you had in a kind of a genealogy of ideas, it went from structuralism to what later became post-structuralism, where they concentrated more on discourse, and that would be your kind of Foucault, Derrida kind of terrain. But if we just move back to what you were saying there, John, with the binaries. I mean, so these binaries make sense largely through narratives and stories. And Roland Barthes has the idea of myths and cultural myths. So he would argue, Barthes, that you have the left orders of signification or orders of meaning. Initially, you would get Gotham and the Batman characters as sort of, a built environment, a built area. Then you would have the second order, which would be the connotation. What does it mean to you? It's never really an individual thing. It's something which is worked on collectively. So the sign becomes agreed on. And he said this is largely through myths. He talks about the idea of myths. So, I mean, an example of that, if we look at, like, said about the idea of the split characters here, is that you have these kinds of myths that go right the way back. If you look at, like, the idea of the warring brothers is an archetype that goes right back to the Bible. Rome, you have the warring brothers. These two split. If you come up through, academia, you get these splits in things like psychoanalysis with an unconscious and a conscious, and this idea of these opposites. And the key here, I think, is a way in which there is a story or a narrative that goes with it. Barth doesn't mean necessarily that he calls it a myth. It doesn't mean it's not true or true. It doesn't matter. It's just really the way in which we decode it, we make sense of it. So I really think that this idea of the half or split is something that runs through this.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking as you were talking there, Rich, about the nature of city. The nature of the city is that it's one thing during the day and another thing at night. And essentially, we've kind of all experienced that sense of being out in London or big city and feeling that it was changing as the light went away. The nightlife was coming out, a little more edgy, a little more youthful, possibly a little more dangerous. And all you have to see is that there is a day city and a night city. Gotham inhabits the night city.
So we can say that, John, I think the key here for the semiotics, though, is how and why and what signs are producing that meaning to us, isn't it? So we could look at, like, informational language for the semiotics analyst level would be the way in which codes would fit together and generate these meanings. So you would have, like, language codes, like this idea of, like, black as a signifier or dark as a signifier of slightly menacing, perhaps, or exciting in the same way.
When you say codes, what are you referring to? Is that the signifier?
Meaning is generated in codes. You have information
that relate together.
Language code, address code.
Right.
There are the code or a series of bits of information that fit together.
So a colour code, like why is red the colour of danger? Well, it's arbitrary. It's just constructed. It's just because society agrees that's the case.
That's right. The code is
just an agreement. Just as the different cultures might not have that case. I mean, it was famously true that in Spain, not anymore. In Spain of the 1980s, you'd go to a wedding and the bride would be dressed in black. That coding of black as death, as funereal, as dangerous, as nighttime, is an agreed code. We just have that. If I wear a lot of black, you might say you're a bit of a goth, or you're off to a funeral.
Died. Yeah.
So we know what that means.
The myth here as well, though, is functioning on something like Gotham. The split is even it allows this kind of iconography of Gotham and these sort of signifiers, if we like, these various kind of images that we see, which generate in us. We already assume. You look at the city and and it's in a kind of like dark fashion like this, and the light's coming from certain angles. We already assume something there, and it kind of allows a space then for something like the Batman and this idea of an other, of justice, crime, criminality. You've got we've talked before in other podcasts about this idea of a big other. Their big other is just something, a mediating force outside of what's actually there, which holds it together. So Gotham's held together by the idea, I think, of justice and crime, isn't it?
It's absolutely, and they're the binaries, aren't they? This is a place where crime happens. This is a place of danger and corruption, and that's where Batman operates. Why is the city at night? Why is the dark, shadowed, Gothic, Art Deco city when it's clearly making references? When we see Art Deco cities and we see Gothic cities, we're thinking Chicago and New York. We're probably not thinking Los Angeles. We might be thinking Victorian London.
Yeah.
London of Jack the Ripper, London of Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That sense in which there's something about the big industrial city has places you shouldn't go. Yeah. There's a danger to it. So the big other is here we are in the middle 20th century. Comics and films are representing cities as places of corruption, danger, and some sort of struggle, some sort of battle.
What did
going
the other?
on. Well, the big other is the corruption, is capitalism maybe. It's the threat, the external threat of the world. Something like in the mid 20th century, that sense in which modernity was fracturing, and there's a feeling of threat. Think of the city as a place of civilization. The polis, the Greek city. It's all white.
Yeah,
and it's got it's got columns, and it's got fora, and it's got the agora, and places where men in robes converse mightily on things intelligent.
And all the codes are agreed,
And all the codes are agreed. We know what the city on the hill looks like. We know what heaven would look like. It's all going to be white for a start. We know what ancient Athens would look like. Ancient Athens of our imagination wasn't coloured like it really was. In our imagination, it's white, and so on. So Gotham is clearly not Athens. It's not downtown Washington D.C. It's not the city centre. It's not the boulevards and order. It's disorder, and disorder is the big other. That thing we'd rather not think about, but always there.
Yeah, all we're doing here is looking at the image and trying to decode the image with the possible layers of meaning. How does it achieve what it does to us, and reading into it. I watched some of the Gotham series. I've not seen it before. It's pretty good, actually. I was enjoying it. But the structure of the police station, it's supposed to be the police area, but there's a massive window, almost like a church, and light comes in through it. So whenever they're talking, very often you get this image of the light shining through, in much the way as you see traditionally in churches, images of churches where you get a light shining through, you get these beams of light coming through. That was something that was used quite a lot in that Gotham series, which I thought was an interesting point, especially when it had the Penguin character. He's almost killed. He's sort of shot and he's thrown into the water, and it's almost like his death is fate, and he comes out the water almost like an image of baptism. But he comes out of this. He's even worse than he was when he went in. It's a horrendous sort of murderous character.
Well, so reverse baptism, isn't it?
Well, but this idea with the church, I thought there were almost religious kind of meanings, sort of loosely tied into the plot and the story. This idea of self-sacrifice.
Well, that's reaching into our iconography and sign reading of Gothic. Gothic architecture, Romanesque architecture. That's the language of our great cathedrals. It's the language of a lot of our churches, and the Gothic is a representation of the Romantic. The Romantic drawn in stone, and that Romantic is those things which we can't express. The storm. We've talked about this before. The reaction to the rational. So in Batman, you might see him standing next to a gargoyle. A gnarly looking demon figure on the edge of a building, and if you go to Chicago or you go to New York, you will see gargoyles and faces. Representation of the Gothic is on. These buildings were built in the 20s and 30s, so or 1890s. So when Neo-Gothic architecture has come back, so when we look into Gotham, we see the Gothic. We think of, and of course we're going back to who were the Goths? The Goths were the great destroyers of civilization.
Things has come full circle in terms of the signifier.
Well, the signifier is embedded.
Yeah,
we know what Gothic means.
Yeah,
So when I look at a church and I see gargoyles, or I look at a building which has been built today in a neo-Gothic style, or when some young teenager dresses up as a Goth and has a lot of dark and black and stuff. I know. In essence, the Goths are the destroyers of civilization. That somehow it doesn't have to be said or known as historically true, but it's how I'll read it. There's something here that's a threat.
So if we take Roland Barthes, if we took something like Gotham, and the sort of narratives which we associate with it, because everyone knows about Batman, however much whether or not it's from a comic book or you're really into the films or the series, but you've got the denotator, which is the block buildings there. You've got the connotation there, which is like the colours and like we said, the dark, the kind of macabre, what it means to us. we've got the cultural myths there, which again, if you read into it slightly more, we can see this idea of, we've mentioned the split, and then we've mentioned about this sort of, even the archetypal stories of warring halves of people or between people, and how we make sense of that. But Roland Barthes, so a lot of his time is spent looking at the myths, but he has another level as well. The last level is one of ideology, and how is ideology transferred through it. So, if you define ideology, the set of ideas that present themselves as the objective truth, there's something that we take for granted, but largely masks something which we agree on. And I thought that the sort of Gotham Batman kind of narrative, it naturalizes capitalism in such a way that we assume that the good is in the wealth, because Batman's extremely, he's super rich, isn't he?
Yes.
That's the whole point of it. He's got no superpowers. His superpowers is his bank balance. He's able to have all these amazing gadgets and this training and this lifestyle that he has because he's just rich. He's very, very wealthy.
Yeah, he's like Iron Man. He's like the creator. Who's Iron Man in real life? I can't remember.
But I think talking
whoever
about
Iron Man is, and Elon Musk. The myth of Elon Musk is the super rich guy that does stuff amazingly because he's got money. Musk is basically a pretty thick bloke. He's a fair old moron, really. But
John, I don't know about that.
He is.
God, dude,
he built a
rocket in your libel. He built a rocket.
He didn't. He funded very clever people to build him a rocket. If I had a ton of money and I said build a rocket, the rocket would appear, and then I'd say, well, I built a rocket, and I believe we're going to fly to Mars. You can't live on Mars, you great twerp. It's not going to happen.
I don't know.
Anyway,
when we say this about Batman or Iron Man or whoever else, but it's stated obviously that's the point of the ideology, that where ideology functions is in the fact that it's taken for granted. But it's hidden in plain sight. We just assume.
We don't even think about it.
Exactly, and that's what Roland Barthes is getting at.
That's ideology when we don't think about it.
Yeah, and I'm going to make a reference here to Mark Fisher, we talked about earlier. Is the double way in which ideology works there? That apparently often the villains are corrupt politicians, or they are gangsters linked to corrupt businessmen. So it would appear to be a critique of capitalism. This is where we got to. Goodness me, our cities are decaying. There's an element of decay and so on. So this is what capitalism. It could be a sort of analysis of the corruption of capitalism. Yeah. But of course, we're sitting in a cinema watching it being put right by the multimillionaire Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne. The multimillionaire Bruce Wayne is somehow putting it right. And and the film itself operates as a signifier of we, the audience, are participating in a critical analysis of the world. These villains are bad, and putting it right. So therefore, everything is okay. It validates capitalism in that way that you can, it's the T-shirt saying "Down with capitalism." Buy these T-shirts, "Down with capitalism."
Is it like saying that capitalism is a simple dichotomy between good and evil? So it's just can easily be correct.
I don't even know. I mean, I just think it just
is it a simple image?
For me, I think it just naturalizes it. We don't question it. It just, that's how he's able to do something good because he's really, really rich. It doesn't really go into more of that. Though John's right. I agree as well that insofar as it can also be decoded, you can also read it into the problems of it. It's like a critique of modernity, isn't it? Where does modernity end up? It can end up in a number of places and has done, both good and bad.
What time scale is in Gotham? Where is it? The future? Is it the past? Because an awful lot of it is retro.
It's interesting that, John, isn't it? Yeah.
You'll have it set somewhere. It looks like a kind of film noir. It's down these lonely streets. A man must go. It's kind of it could be Humphrey Bogart. It could be The Big Sleep. It's the 90s sort of dark, and you see in Blade Runner and lots of films that retrospective, but somehow not. It's the future as well.
It's future,
so it's a nowhere place, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in that sense, it's saying to us, this could be our future. Is this our present?
And the kind of, like, from a semiotic point of view, the dystopian dimension of it is signified to us by the codes. The as we were mentioning earlier, the idea of the dark, the smoke, everything is transferring a kind of meaning, even to the point of the bat signals. An icon in semiotic language is an image that comes to represent itself. Yes. So a symbol is something we agree on, like a red, a non-smoking sign. The line down the middle would be a symbol. We agree that means no. But an icon is a sign that represents, it's an image that represents itself. So something becomes iconic, like the bat signal with the bat on it. It's iconic. We know exactly what it means. So if you like, the image of Gotham is anchored through the bat signal.
Well, an anchored symbol is something that goes, okay, I now know where I am. But it doesn't mean it's not any less arbitrary than all other symbols. It will change over time. There might come a time when someone will get out of the archive a Batman movie or find an old T-shirt and say, "Oh, this used to represent a set of films and comics of the 20th century." It won't necessarily fix forever. All symbolism, imagery, and so on is liable to change. It's always ultimately arbitrary. But an anchor is one that it's the logo. It's a logo. An anchor's logos in advertising. What is this advert? Have you ever been watching those adverts on television where you think, what the hell are they advertising? It looks a sweep of landscape, a beautiful woman. Is it perfume? Is it cars?
Clear reference. It's a clear reference.
Is it perfumes or cars? And then bingo, it's Chanel No. 5. I get that. Now I see what all the beautiful lady, the desert landscape, the man on the horse. What was that all about? It's advertising thing. So the anchor is the moment where it brings you to a realization.
It's the meaning then, whatever the viewer subscribes to it, like in advertising.
Well, yes,
there's a relationship.
It's ultimately still arbitrary. Yeah,
between the sign and the signifier.
It's still socially generated.
It becomes more effective when more people agree on it. I thought it was an interesting point as well, the way in which Gotham has changed over time. So the history is, initially, in a kind of very cartoony sense, it was lighter and brighter. It had very definite angles, and I think the Batman character reflected this as well. There were the goodies and there were the baddies, and Batman was, he was Bruce Wayne and he was Batman, but there was a kind of like a humour there between them. And as you see it go on, you see the edges become more kind of muddied. Like you said, there's more smoke and smog within Gotham. It becomes darker. I think that the character of Batman himself, the shift, there's a kind of internal dialogue that wasn't in the earlier representations of it becomes all more Freudian. It makes more of his parents being killed and the internal struggles that he's having. And so, I wonder if that says something about you mentioned earlier, John, the uncertainty. Is that something as well that plays on uncertainty of contemporary culture? We're not sure, there's a distrust in general, that kind of postmodern breakdown of the meta-narrative.
And our awareness of the psychological uncertainty. So Batman struggles with his own identity.
Exactly.
He struggles with his own mental health, really. Yeah. You worry for Batman. So in that sense, he's no longer, he's because they start...
And his physical health, John. I mean, in the later films, you see him, he's all bashed up and bruised and he's patching himself up. You never saw that in the early representations. I wonder if that says something about, the role of, the role of certainty, the role of experts, the role of, this breakdown, multiple narratives and stories going on.
And the boundary between him and his villains, the Joker, the Riddler, the Iceman, or whatever they are, and the Penguin. These people are all odd, weird caricatures. You can talk about why they exist in this world of they're often physically oddly deformed. We could decode that. But Batman gets closer to them. He becomes damaged himself.
Yeah.
He isn't the Bruce Wayne and Batman of the television series, whack and pow.
That was when it was so kind of childish. You saw the punch and there was a pow.
Yeah, kapow. Yeah. The much derided and much loved television series.
Batman in that series?
Adam West. Yeah, Adam West. Poor chap. Yeah,
got come a long way from that. Yeah.
Well, that's the question. Why did it go into the world of dark, bleak, Gotham, misty, and morally ambiguous, so that Batman himself becomes altogether more complex and more flawed.
That's the key.
And more morally ambiguous. He's Dirty Harry. In the Dirty Harry films of the 1970s, He's the authorities say, no, obey the rules. You can't behave that way, Harry. And he becomes, how does he defeat the villain? By being more villainous than the villain, by being more ruthless than them. So his exercise of violence becomes extreme.
Which is a kind of very topical at the moment, isn't it? You know, our cultural reflections, if you like, start to become. I mean, this is why pop culture is so interesting, isn't it? Because it's a map, isn't it, of where we're at the present.
If there were a psychology for the world, if there were a personality for the world, you describe it as psychopathic. Yeah. We are definitely living in a psychopathic world.
That's very interesting, John.
You know, it's insane. We have a completely odd and arbitrary attitude to violence, to terrorism, the good, the bad guys, the good guys and the bad guys. We distinguish between the two. What are the good guys doing? We're looking at the Middle East right now, and so on. And you look at and a world based upon an idea of mutual self-destruction in the mid-20th century. You know, mass annihilation of millions of innocent people was the basis of our safety. That's psychopathic. It's insane.
Yeah. It's an interesting idea to see the world's, world culture as a psychiatric patient. I find that interesting.
Yeah, it would on the couch. And that is
what it's saying. That's why, as Rich says, pop culture is interesting, because pop culture is the murmurs of the world about what it thinks of itself.
Look at what it's saying about class. Talk about the underlying ideologies.
Yeah.
Well, wealth is, what it says about wealth. Or what Rich, you've already said that, oddly, wealth gives you capacity and your and value and superpowers. Yeah. It says one thing about wealth there. Yeah. Authority. But on the other hand, it's also corrupting, because there's the sort of, that's what everyone seems to be after. The sort of villains always steal stuff. Yeah, so Batman is, on the other hand, the rich capitalist fighting people who want to be rich capitalists, but they're using crime to do it. But then again, capitalism is itself a form of crime.
And he's become more corrupted as a series of depictions have gone on.
He's become more morally ambiguous.
More morally ambiguous, yeah.
More violent.
And there's a connection. There's a bit like world society or the West. Of course, we're not talking about China or
yes,
the Far East here. We're only really talking about the Western capitalism. But I suppose everything's Western now. It's with globalization.
I think it's a good analysis of the West, perhaps, with this kind of like, I mean, it's just returning a gaze back on itself, isn't it? On the viewer.
Yeah,
I think. Sorry, John, go on.
I was going to say authoritarian capitalism, which is what you find in China and Russia right now, is just a more overt form of the violence that is latent to capitalism generally.
That's interesting.
You just see it. It's just there more obviously. Putin is, and the repressive nature of China is just an expression of the logic of the market. They're making capitalism, or in China, right, isn't it, work more efficiently in a way. By expressing it more honestly.
I think on top of that, the idea of I think in order for Gotham to work as a sign that we would still, if it came out now with Adam West, where he's going pow, and this Robin with him, this kind of thing, there would be
wild music.
It wouldn't be there's a kind of authenticity, I think, to these later Batman incarnations, that there's this idea of the authentic city where it may be awful, it may be this, but at least it's true, and it's even if the truth is this kind of darkness.
It's a fascinating point, actually, isn't it? It's absolutely fascinating, because I think we are very odd attitude towards the dark, bleak city, because it confers on people a certain authenticity. I mean, I think that's the basis of an awful lot of black culture. Black African American culture is rested very much on the authenticity derived from the city, And the city itself becomes the neighborhood, the hood, becomes a place that confers on you both your authenticity. I am from that. Down those mean streets I had to go. I was born into this. The violence has made me the real person I am. On the other hand, it's also destructive and in danger of bringing you down. So your narrative becomes escaping from it. So, but that incredible that authenticity idea was almost there's a scene I was thinking of this the other day. There's a scene in, the film Casablanca.
Yeah.
Rick's Cafe. In Rick's Cafe, the Nazi, who's an archetypal Nazi, absolute archetypal, he's got a scar down his face and yes. So this is Rick's Cafe. And and he says to him, well, we are going to win the war. And one day we will even conquer America. Or something like that, I'm paraphrasing. And Rick says, well, if you get to America, go to New York. There's some places in New York you really don't want to go. Oh, yeah. So the Nazis, there's bits of New York, even the Nazis wouldn't want to go in.
Yeah, and that's worth a boast, yeah.
Well, it's worth a boast. You said it.
I think the authenticity as well is like, if we go on the other end of the scale, I mean, there's the believable city, but you often hear like, here at Launch Strip, like Milton Keynes, it's got no soul. It's soulless. It's not a real, there's this idea that a city could be built and it hasn't, it lacks authenticity somehow, perhaps because it doesn't have the history. I mean, you can see this again in popular culture. Like the old now, the Truman Show was an example of a fake city that's not believable. We don't believe in it. And in a real sense, there was the, what's it called? The Disney City in America.
City, yeah. Was it New Harmony? Harmony? Is that Robert Owens? Celebration.
That's it. Yeah. So celebration. If anyone is listening to this, got this part. Celebration is really a city based upon the iconography, the signifiers of Disney. So they say they're boasted that it's something that which it will be familiar to you. You'll recognize it, and when you see it, you've got these kind of like. It's not like, I don't mean it's like got the Disney characters wandering around. I mean, it has like the water towers and the streets are all made with the picket fences. It looks like something out of a Disney film, and you can actually live there. So it's almost becomes a representation of something else.
Well, it's binary is the suburb. The binary of Gotham is the suburb of it's dull, it's conforming, it's empty of value, anonymous. It's somehow also secretive. People twitching the curtains and looking at each other and so on. It's that idea of the Stepford Wives, the American Beauty.
Yes, that's a key. It's not real. It's not real. It does.
Everyone's playing a role. Yeah.
So we've got our kind of for Roland Barthes, kind of this. He would there talk about the myth, the cultural myth of it, and then it achieves signification through things like the meaning of the white picket fence. What does that mean then? What to signify that all of this stuff? Nothing is taken for granted for someone that's into this sort of realm,
isn't it? To break
things down, definitely, and you can apply it to anything from
signifiers and meaning.
Yeah.
And you can read a suburb or a street in London or any city through signifiers that reveal class, race, gender, attitudes of those kinds, and how they're represented.
There's the one question you say, "What is this place trying to tell me?" Is that when you go to it, you say, "What is this place trying to tell me?"
Well, not even trying. What has it already told you? Is probably
what has it already told me. Yeah.
What are the assumptions you've got, and then why? Yeah. And then if you can go, you can really start at the first level. What's actually there? What it means to you? What it means in a collective sense? What are perhaps some of the hidden meanings, the ideological dimensions to it? And then you've got all of the the actual. It's like most of these kinds of academic kind of areas. It's about understanding the language of semiotics. Once you've got that, it's relatively easy and quite good fun to look at things and decode them. It is enjoyable to do.
Well, I'm going to find out a bit more. I didn't know much about it.
I need once you start decoding the world, it's difficult to stop.
Yeah.
Becomes a hobby.
Yeah, and of course, how does Batman know when his dinner's ready?
Is this a joke?
Dinner,
Is this a joke?
dinner, dinner, dinner,
Oh,
dinner,
right.
dinner, dinner.
That's
Oh, sorry. On
Yeah,
that note,
yeah, that qualifies as proper joke humour.
that's it. Right, I've got to get going, guys. So let's really.
And that brings to an end this episode of the Spinoza Triad podcast with John Gibbs, Dr. Richard Miller, and Dan Rowlands. In this episode, we discussed Batman and Gotham City. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. We certainly enjoy discussing these things. If you want to hear it again, you can find it on Spotify, YouTube, and many other platforms, along with our website and Facebook page. Thank you for listening.